I'm gonna take you through my entire leg day mobility. So I do this before my leg day workouts, and I usually do this a couple other times throughout the week. If you're like me and your hips are always stiff and tight and achy, or sometimes your lower back is even achy, or for me, I'm just a mess, but my hamstrings are always super tight. Most of it starts with my hips, but what I like to do is go through a full routine. So you're gonna see that I start at the bottom and basically I work my way up. So we're gonna go toes, ankles, calves, hamstrings, hips, quads, all that, work our whole way up and go bottom to top and do everything there. So the first thing I like to do is get in a kneeling position and then get my toes underneath me. So I lean my body weight back all the way, essentially sitting my butt onto the heels as much as I can. Pause for a second and then push through the toes to come back up. And I do this for 10 reps. And then from there, I just flip my feet around. So I go on the top of my feet and I do the exact same thing. So I lean back. I try to get some extra body weight over the top. So I actually get to the bottom where my butt touches my heels. And then I lean back as much as I can without my knees coming off the floor. Depending on your flexibility, you might even be able to get all the way back here. But I go down as far as I can, get a good, nice stretch all through my feet, and then push into my feet, up through my legs, bring myself back to the top. The key here is to go deep enough to get a good stretch, but not so much that it's painful. And again, that your knees don't come off the floor. And then from there, I do one more thing for the toes. So I get into a split stance. What we're going to do is press up onto our toes. The key here is to make sure that both heels are off the floor the entire time, and you're really pressing up onto those back toes as much as you can. And then from there, I try to get into some ankle mobility. So what we're gonna do is nice and slow and controlled here is just roll the ankle out and pause for a second, and then come back to the middle to get some flexion in the ankle going externally. Try to keep the outside of your foot against the floor the entire time as you rotate out. And we're gonna do 10 of these on either side. You'll probably notice on a lot of these exercises, some more than others, that one side is tighter than the other, or that one side has more flexibility than the other. That's okay. That's part of the goal of doing all of this, is to strengthen it up, to hopefully also loosen everything up as time goes on the more you do this. And then from there, we're just gonna flip it. So we're gonna go external rotation, so rotating onto the ankle going in. Again, keeping the inside of your foot this time touching the floor the entire time. Again, doing 10 reps on either side. And then from there, we're going to the calves. So I like to start off in a downward dog position. And what you can see me doing here is basically rocking forward and back so that my heels come off. And then I'm trying to push my heels back to the floor to tap for a second, getting a nice deep stretch all through the calf. So once again, we're doing 10 of these. And then from there, I try to step my toes in a little bit more. And we're gonna pedal this time. So pushing one side down and then the other. So the rocks, you're gonna do 10. And then this one, we're gonna do 10 on either side. So 20 altogether. Then from that one, if you have access to a slant board, we're gonna step onto that. Get set up with something that you can hold up against the squat rack or whatever you have. And then what we're gonna do, if you can, put one foot behind the ankle and just lean forward as much as you can to get a really deep stretch, trying to keep that heel placed against the slant board the entire time. We're gonna hold each side for 30 to 40 seconds. My calves are just naturally tight, so that's why I like to do that one as well before a workout. Typically, I save stretching for after a workout, but that one I try to loosen up my calves a little bit to get into a leg day. But if you're not that tight, you can do a squatted body weight calf raise instead for a warm up. So if you feel a little more loose in your calves already, you're gonna get into a deep squatted position. Again, go up against a pole or whatever you have to hold yourself up on. And you're basically just pressing up into your calves like a calf raise, pressing up that body weight, and do these for 10 to 15 reps. Then from there, we're gonna start working on the hamstrings. So again, if you have a slant board, we're gonna grab that. If not, you can grab a plate or two on the floor together and put your toes up on that. And we're just doing a forward fold here, nice and slow and controlled. So just get a stretch in the hamstring as low as you can go. So just push the butt back as much as you can, drive the knees back as much as you can, keeping the shoulder blades back. Go down until you get a nice deep stretch in the hamstring for a second, and then squeeze on the way back up. And again, we're gonna do this for 10 reps. And if it's a day where you're gonna be doing some deadlifts, I highly recommend adding this to the warm up as well. So grab a foam roller, whether it's the studded one or a regular one, whatever you have, place it at your hips, put your forearms onto it, and then you're gonna do a deadlift motion, keeping this pressed against your thighs the entire time. So send the hips and butt back as the foam roller goes down your thighs, up your arms, getting that deep stretch, and then come back up. Making sure your arms are in contact with the roller the entire time, keeping the butt back, driving those knees back as much as you can, getting a nice deep stretch hamstring. You'll pause for a second and then come back to the top. And then the other thing I like to do for my hamstrings is a version of a pancake or a seated good morning, however you want to call it. So what we're going to do here is feet out wide onto your heels. And if you want to take some intensity off, you can just basically bring your heels closer to your body, keeping a little bit more bend in your knee, depending on how comfortable you are in the stretch. If you have one of these bars, you can use one of these. It's kind of just a little bit of added here to help the right motion. So as you see, I'm sitting here and then I push my butt back, which will activate my hamstrings a little bit more, keeping the core nice and tight. and then we're just sending the torso forward, pushing the chest down towards the floor. We're not rounding forward, so a nice flat back here, going slow and controlled down as much as you can go. Get a deep stretch in the hamstrings, push into the heels as you come back up. And if you don't have the bar, you can do this with body weight, or you can even have 2 dumbbells and hold them in between your thighs that way. All right, and then moving on to the quads, we're gonna start off with a nice, deep, long, low lunge, knees over toes. So I like to do these on a bench. Place your foot onto a bench or a box, platform, whatever you have. Something that'll put your knees at about even with your hips, and then really step back on that back foot, heel stays off, and we're lunging forward, getting a deep stretch in our quads and even in our groin, and we're lunging forward to drive that knee over our toes. So you go forward as much as you can, nice and low. At first, you might have to bring the back foot in slightly. That's okay. Ideally, over time, again, we're working on opening that stance up even more. I want you to imagine that this side of your butt, this side of your glutes is going forward, and the back leg is going back. You're pushing this hip forward, and on the back side, you're actually trying to pull your butt back. So you're doing a counter pull here. So the side that's lunging forward is going forward, and the back side of your hip and your butt, it's trying to pull back. So you're trying to pull each other away in a sense. And again, you're gonna do 10 of these on either side, making sure you keep a nice flat back on this as well. And then from there, we're doing a modified pigeon fold. So again, I like to use a bench or a platform for this one. So what you're gonna do is whatever front leg you're gonna work here at a 90-degree angle as much as you can. Lunge back a little bit, get into a lunge position from there with your back leg, heel off again, and you can kind of lean onto this knee to help push it onto the bench. You want this knee against the bench the entire time, so I actually kind of lean on it. And then what you're doing from there is leaning your torso forward and then coming back up. I don't want you to push your weight up off your leg or the bench. You're trying to push this knee into the bench and squeeze those glutes to raise yourself back up rather than pushing yourself up. And then we're gonna get into a couch stretch with a bit of a fold and lunge here. So I like doing these against the wall, but you can have a box or even a bench. The goal here is to have your toes facing up so that like the top of your foot is against the bench, wall, whatever it is you're using. The closer you can get the knee to the wall, the more stretch you're gonna get on that quad. So front legs at 90 degrees. Sit up nice and tall. Don't arch your back too much. Keep it nice and flat as much as you can. And then from there, you're gonna squeeze your glute and get even more activation in that quad. So sit up straight, squeeze the glute, and then keeping everything squeezed on this side, you'll lean forward and then come back to the start. Again, doing these for 10 reps on either side. From there, I go into some Cossack squats. So the goal here is, so the idea here is feet nice and wide, everything facing forward. And then as you kind of side lunge to one side, keep the side that you're lunging to, that foot stays firmly on the floor. And then the opposite foot is rotating open. You'll come back to the middle and then switch. And then I usually like to add in some squat folds. So basically I grab my ankles from the top of my feet. I get into a deep squat and then forward fold. And then the last one I do for my leg mobility is a single kneeling hip thrust, or I kind of call them like a groin hip thrust. Grab a kettlebell, nothing too crazy on weight here. One knee's bent on the toes in the back, other leg straightened out with your heel on the floor, ideally having that foot even with the knee that's down, and you're going to rock back and then hip thrust forward. You'll feel a nice deep stretch inside the groin. So we're pushing our butt back and then swinging our butt, squeezing it forward, and do about 8 of those on either side. So save that routine, try it out, like I said, either before your leg day, or ideally that full routine would be on your day off. So on a day that you're not lifting, you can do some mobility on that day as your active rest. And if you're doing it as just a strictly mobility day, you could actually do every exercise for 2 sets. And then if you're somebody that doesn't really struggle with tight hamstrings or whatever it is, you can cut out some of these exercises that are more for the hamstrings if you really don't feel like you need it. And maybe instead of doing 2, 3, or 4 of them, just do one of them as your warm-up routine. Then you can save a few minutes that way as well. And if you find this video helpful, make sure you follow the channel to help you feel better and move better.